fit like ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and everybody else that's watching. My name is Pauline and I am a storyteller from the northeast of Scotland, and I've got a story for you. It's a Norwegian folktale and it's one of my favourite trickery stories. Now, once upon a time there was this king. Now, the king wasn't one of the nice kings that you get in a lot of stories. He was greedy, he was a snob, all the worst possible traits that you could have in a king. He didn't care about the people that lived in his kingdom. There was no hospitals, there was no schools. Everybody, unless they were somebody, was very, very poor. And his wife was just as bad at him. You know what? They had a daughter, and she was all right. She was the only saving grace in that family. And one day, the king was out on his horse riding around and he came across this young lad. Now, this young lad's name was Peik. Peik was 17 years old and he lived with his twin sister in the farmhouse that their mother and father had left them. His sister was as hardworking could be. She was always out in the fields working with the animals. She was cooking, she was cleaning, she did everything, and she was always on at Peik to stop sitting around doing nothing. So that morning, Peik had got himself up and he decided that he was going to do what he did best of all, playing tricks. And he was sitting around thinking of tricks to play, playing on his wee whistle, wondering who he could play a trick on, when along came the king. And the king said to him, "You boy, what are you doing there, sitting doing nothing? People in my kingdom should be hard working, making money so I can tax them." And Peik said, "Well, your majesty, I am working hard. My name is Peik and I am famous for playing tricks." "Tricks, eh?" said the king. "Yes," said Peik. "Do you like a trick, your majesty?" "I do." "Go on then," said the king. "Play a trick on me now." And Peik said, "Well, I would, your majesty, but unfortunately I don't have my trickery sticks with me." "Trickery what?" "Trickery sticks," said Peik. "They're the sticks that I use to play tricks." "Oh," said the king, "well, that's fine. Go and get them. I'll wait." Peik said, "Your majesty, I live far, far away. By the time I'd walked there, it would have been dark, and I don't want your majesty to sit on this stone and wait for me, getting cold as you wait." "That's okay," said the king. "I'll give you my horse." And the king got down off his horse and he helped Peik up onto it, and Peik made out that he'd never ridden on a horse in his life. So the king said, okay, you can have my saddle as well. And eventually off Peik went on the king's horse with the king's saddle, which was a very expensive one, and he went off to the nearest town where he sold the horse and the saddle, and he got a bag of gold for the horse and a bag of silver for the saddle. And he went back home to the farmhouse and his sister was just delighted with his day's work. The king, meanwhile, sat and waited and waited, and eventually it was cold and he went home. And it was only when he was sitting having his tea that night that he realised that somebody, Peik, had played a trick on him. And he was furious. So the next day he got a couple of soldiers and he asked around and he found out where Peik lived and he made his way to Peik's farmhouse. Now, Peik's sister was at the window chopping onions and just saw someone coming, and she said, "Peik, I think that's the king on his way up towards our farmhouse." "Quick," said Peik, "let them in and ask me if the porridge is ready yet." So, quick as anything, he went over to the fire where they had a great big cauldron, big black cauldron hung over the fire, full of porridge which was bubbling away, cooking for their breakfast. And Peik took the big hearthstone, stuck it down in the middle of the floor of the farmhouse and put the cauldron on top of it. Just then there was the big bang at the door. The sister went and answered it and in came the king. He hardly even waited for her to answer the door. He was right in there and in Peik's face. "You played a trick on me," he said. "Yes," said Peik. "Did you like it?" "Like it? I'm absolutely furious." excuse me a moment, said Peik's sister. Peik, is the porridge ready yet? And Peik, who was kneeling down by the porridge pot on the stone on the floor, stirred it, tasted it, and went, delicious, it is ready. And the king said, what are you doing down there on the floor? That porridge won't cook there. Oh, but it will, said Peik. Oh, you can have a taste, your majesty. And he offered the king some. And the king said, how's it cooking down there? Well, it's a magic porridge pot, your majesty. Really? Said the king. Yes, said Peik. I want it. I must have it. Is it just porridge? No, you can cook anything in it. We only cook porridge because we're so poor, but you can have soup, you can cook stews, you can cook anything that you want. Right, I want it, said the king. Oh, but it was very expensive, said Peik. How much was it? Said the king. It was a whole bag of gold, said Peik. It was 100 gold coins. Right, I've got that right now. Sorry about that, somebody came to the door, it was the postie. Right, where was I? So, the king was asking Peik how much he was going to sell the magic cooking pot for. And Peik had said, 100 gold coins. Well, I'll give you that money right here, right now. And the king gave a wee bag with 100 gold coins to Peik, and Peik gave him the pot, and off went the king, quite happy. Well, that night, the king had invited all the lords, all the ladies, all the courtiers into the great big dining hall at the castle, and he sat at the top of the table, and it was about 8:30, and all their tummies were rumbling, and he had the contents of a stew, a venison stew. There was potatoes, vegetables, and the choicest cuts of meat in the cauldron. And he was there at the top of the table, stirring it with this big wooden spoon, when one of the lords said, excuse me, your majesty, what are you doing there? I, said the king, am cooking your supper. We can't help but notice that it's not on top of a fire, said the lord. Yes, said the king, it's a magic cooking pot. Well, they sat, and they watched, and they waited, but of course the stew didn't boil because the king had been had. And when he realised that Peik had played a second trick on him, he was furious. And the next morning, he made his way back to Peik's farmhouse with 5 soldiers. And just like before, Peik's sister was at the window watching, but this time Peik was prepared, and he was sat twiddling his thumbs, playing on his whistle, when the king and the soldiers barged into the farmhouse. And the king, he said to Peik, you played a trick on me. Oh, said Peik, no, I didn't. I had the whole of the court there, and it didn't boil. My stew didn't boil. And Peik said, well, your majesty, that's because you didn't have the stone. You didn't ask about the stone. What stone? Said the king. This stone. And Peik pointed to the hearthstone, which was on the floor, and the king said, what's that? And Peik said to the king, it's a magic hearthstone. Of course the pot wouldn't have boiled if it wasn't on the magic hearthstone. I forgot to tell you, the two of them come together. Really? Said the king. I want it. Well, said Peik, it cost me 200 gold coins. I don't want to give it away just to anyone. And the king said, I'll have it. Peik got another bag, 200 gold coins, and off went the king, quite happy with his stone. And the same thing happened that night. The king had all the courtiers round. This time the pot, with all its vegetables and potatoes and the choicest cuts of meat, were in the cauldron on top of the stone, and everybody watched, and everybody waited, and waited a bit more. It was almost 9 o'clock by this time when a lady said, excuse me, your majesty, when shall we be eating? And the king put his finger in the stew, and he realised it wasn't boiling, and he realised that Peik had played a trick on him, and he was furious. So the next morning, he made his way to Peik's cottage, the farmhouse, with 20 soldiers to take Peik and throw him into the deepest, darkest dungeons. However, Peik was ready, and he had got his sister to go to the market and get a pig's bladder, which is what they used to make footballs out of. And he had filled it with blood from some of the animals that had been slaughtered that day at the market. And he had told his sister to shove the pig's bladder into her clothing. So here's the sister in her dress with a great big pig's bladder full of blood underneath it, and the king knocks on the door. Well, the sister went to answer the door, and the king and the 20 soldiers all barged into the farmhouse, or as many of them as could get in. And the king said, "Where's your brother? He played a trick on me, and I am furious." And she said, "Well, the thing is, he's sleeping, Your Majesty, and I don't want to wake up my brother when he's sleeping because he gets ever so angry." "Wake him up now," said the king. So through went the sister, and she went into the bedroom where Peik was sleeping, and she shook him, and he got up, and all the king could hear was shouting, "Why did you wake me up? I was fast asleep. Why?" This is what I'm like when I get woken up. But Peik followed his sister through, and in front of the king, he was, "Excuse me, Your Majesty, I get really angry and my sister knows not to wake me up." And he took a knife and he stabbed his sister right in the stomach. And of course, the knife cut the bladder full of pig's blood, and it spilled out everywhere, but the sister acted as if she'd been stabbed in the stomach, and she fell down dead. And the king said, "What? You killed your sister just because she woke you up?" "Oh yeah," said Peik. I hate getting woken up." And he was mopping the blood off his hands when the king said, "But that's murder." "Oh, she won't stay dead," said Peik. "Hang on." And he reached above the fireplace where there was this old hunting horn, and he took the hunting horn and he blew it over his sister's face. And the sister blinked and woke up, and she was alive again. And the king said, "Wow, what's that?" And Peik held up the hunting horn and said, "Oh, this old thing, this is a magic hunting horn. It used to belong to our father. If you kill anyone in haste, as I quite often do if I get woken up, all you need to do is blow it over their face, and then they'll come alive again." "Wow," said the king, "I want it." "Oh, no, you can't have it," said Peik. It's a family heirloom. It would cost at least 500 gold coins. "I want it," said the king. And Peik got handed this bag full of 500 gold coins. Well, off goes the king with his horn, his hunting horn, his magical hunting horn. And that night, all the courtiers are sat around, and he found some reason to pick a fight with his wife. Now, you have to remember that this wife was horrible. She was just as bad as the king, maybe even worse. So she deserves everything she's going to get. And at the end of the argument, he said, "No! I am right and you are wrong." And the king took his dagger and stabbed his wife in the stomach, and she fell down dead, much to the shock and the horror of all the lords and the ladies and their daughter who were sitting round the banqueting table. And the king laughed. He said, "Don't worry." And he brought out the magic hunting horn and he leant over her face. Doot! And he sat, and he waited. But the king noticed that the queen was still lying there, and he took the horn again, toot, and he sat, and he waited, but the queen did not rise, for the king had killed her. And the king realised that Peik had played a trick on him, and he was furious. So the next day, he took 100 soldiers to arrest Peik. Now, Peik, of course, was prepared. And what he had done was he had insisted with his sister that they swap clothes. So Peik, remember they were twins, was now dressed as his sister. Luckily, they both had this sort of long flowing golden hair, so they looked like each other anyway. And he'd told his sister to run off and start a new life, and he'd handed her all of the gold coins, and off she went, quite happy. And here was Peik in the cottage at the farmhouse, all by himself in his sister's clothes. He's so mean. When the king arrived, and the king arrived with 100 soldiers, furious, ready to arrest Peik, and he saw Peik's sister, then he said, "Oh, my girl, where is your brother? I'm going to throw him into the dungeon and then cut off his head." "He's gone," said Peik, disguised as Peik's sister. "He's gone away. He plays horrible tricks on people, and now he's gone away and he's taken all the money, and I have nothing to live off. I am destitute." And the king, well, he didn't feel sorry for her, but one of the soldiers nudged him and suggested that as he was the king and had lots of money, and how this was partially his fault, that he should take Peik's sister, Peik, back to his castle and maybe find her a job. Well, eventually the king agreed that this would be a good idea, and Peik, who was dressed as Peik's sister, got taken back to the castle and got given the job of entertaining the king's lovely daughter. So here was Peik living in the same quarters as the king's lovely daughter. And, you know, they got on really well, and he was happy by day and he was happy by night. And the long and the short of it was that Peik and the king's daughter fell in love with each other. And Peik wanted to make this official. He wanted to get married to her. You know, maybe a year or so passed and he was still there. And eventually, in a moment of enthusiasm, the daughter let slip to the king who Peik actually was. And the king was furious. "Right," said the king. "That's it," said the king. "No more tricks. I will kill him." And in front of all the courtiers and everyone, he had Peik brought in, still in his girl's clothes, and he told Peik that he knew exactly what had been going on. "And as a punishment, I'm going to put you in a barrel, and that barrel is going to be rolled off the top of the highest cliffs into the sea, and you will be dead. Dead. Dead." "Okay, fair enough," said Peik. "Yeah, I've played some mean tricks on you. I suppose I deserve it. But you know what? Maybe you should give me a couple of days to think about the horrible things that I've done. I think that would only be just." So the king had the barrel with Peik nailed inside it, placed at the top of the cliffs, and Peik was left there, all by himself in the barrel, to think about the bad things that he had done. And a day passed, and Peik heard hoofbeats, and he was panicking. He couldn't think of a way to get out of this barrel. He was well and truly nailed in there. But along had come this royal from another country, and he'd seen this barrel sitting all by itself at the top of a cliff, and Peik had heard the hoofbeats and heard somebody stopping, and he said, "Hello? Hello?" Now, the prince, who'd been riding across the top of the cliffs and who had seen this barrel, stopped and said, "There's somebody in there." "Yeah," said Peik. Yeah, I wonder if you could let me out." "Not likely," said the prince, "and not unless you tell me exactly why you're in there." So Peik told his story. And the upshot of it was that this prince was from another kingdom, a kingdom that totally hated the king. And, well, my enemy's enemy is my friend. And the prince decided that it would be the decent thing to do to let Peik out. I presume that he had a claw hammer with him, because the nails were very quickly taken out. Peik shook his hand, thanked him so gratefully, and the prince went on his way. Now, the next day, the king comes along first thing in the morning, and he sees the barrel, asks Peik, who's obviously not in there anymore, if he has any last things to say. Peik doesn't, so the barrel is rolled off the cliff and smashes down, down, down into the sea. And the king dusts his hands off and presumes that he's managed to get rid of Peik for good. But a couple of days later, Peik arrives in the king's castle. And he is standing, he's been knocking at the door, he is permitted entry, and he asks for an audience with the king. And the king was absolutely amazed to see that Peik was dripping with jewels. He had on a crown, he had rings, he had on expensive robes, there was a really, really expensive horse at the gates. And the king said, "What are you doing here? You're supposed to be dead." Now Peik, who had got all this money off the rich prince, who wanted to do as much as possible to embarrass the king, he said to the king, "Oh, it was great. I just came back to thank your majesty. Thank you very, very much, because when you rolled me off that cliff, I landed in this amazing kingdom beneath the ocean. And I was met by the merfolk, and they were just so amazed to see a human, and they gave me all this gold, and I was married off to the mermaid king's daughter. So I'm a prince of the ocean now, and I just wanted to come back and thank your majesty." "Really?" said the king. "Yes," said Peik. "Really? I just wanted to thank. Very fair." "And you say you were down in the kingdom of the merfolk?" Yeah. The only thing that they lack down there is, a decent prime minister. They asked me to ask you as king if you knew anybody that was clever, that was kind-hearted, that was good with money, and, that they would pay him, so much more money than they ever gave to me. There's pearls, there's gold, there's, you name it. "Really?" said the king. "How do I get there?" "Well, I suppose you would just do the same thing as that happened to me." And so it was that the king was nailed up inside a barrel and rolled off the cliff. And he landed in the water, where of course there was no king of the mermaids, because Peik had played his very last trick on the king. And that was the end of that. Peik married the daughter, the king's daughter, and the two of them ruled well. They made sure that everybody in their kingdom was happy, that they were educated, that they were well, and the princess always knew that no matter what happened, she would be safe, because I suppose a ruler should have a trick or two up their sleeves. I hope you like that. If you like the stories, please follow me on Pauline Cordiner, a Scottish storyteller, on Facebook, Pauline Cordiner on YouTube. There's also more stories at Tag Team Tales, and also at the World Storytelling Cafe, where we'll get sets of stories from storytellers across the world. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.